Welcome to another edition of Regenerative Inspiration. I'm here today with Matt and Megan from Ridgeline Suppressors. We have a great conversation. I met Matt and Megan quite a few months ago and have really formed a good relationship, and they have done some amazing things, not only like from a standpoint of family and their own business and starting into the firearms industry, going from engineering into that place. There's an awesome story here and a lot to learn. I think you'll enjoy it, and I think it might surprise you when you start to find out about the actual true technology behind suppressors and what that can do for your hearing, and why it's actually becoming really widely adopted across like half hunters and just regular target shooters and things like that. So with that, Matt, Megan, thanks for coming on today, and give me a little bit of a background of how in the world do both of you get into the firearms industry of all things? How did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks for the intro. Well, I think hopefully it's obvious, but I'm Matt. That's Megan. um, and so, yeah, how we got into firearms. It's simple, but it's maybe a little bit complicated. We just enjoy it for one. That's like the big reason. So we enjoy shooting. We enjoy the outdoors. I grew up around it. I grew up in northern New Mexico, small town. And I grew up hunting and fishing and ranching and everything outdoors. And so, like, firearms is kind of like just a natural thing for me. And so, given that with my background as well in engineering, it just fit really well. I come from a background of from the aerospace industry and additive manufacturing, which is 3D printing, so metal AM and analysis. So I've done a lot of like structural and fluid analysis. And so you combine like all of these pieces together, and we have basically all the pieces that you need to design a really high performance firearm suppressor, and just in general firearm components, given that we have all the skill set in house, and I really enjoy it, and that's what I like to do. So,
Megan,
I think that
what
pretty
about
much
you?
sums it up.
When he came to
Hi.
you and said, "Hey, I'm going to start a suppressor company," what was your first reaction?
Well, it didn't actually start as a suppressor company. We started as a manufacturing company. And that journey started about 8 years ago when we decided that we wanted to kind of opt out of the corporate world and have something for our family that was sustainable and that was more self-reliant. We didn't want to be stuck in that system of always being, held to this, the corporate whims, losing jobs. I mean, and in our area in that time, a lot of the big companies were leaving the state, and a lot of them were laying people off. And we, didn't want that stress, and we didn't want to be susceptible to that. So we decided that we were going to take on a whole new level of stress and start our own company. And then at least at that point, we were accountable to ourselves. And so this started as a manufacturing company doing precision work for like government type stuff. And then Matt kind of brought in his background of additive manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, and it kind of evolved into what can we do for ourselves instead of taking on these government contracts? What can we be producing on our own with these skills that he has? And that's where we brought in this component of our outdoor lifestyle in the firearm industry to be able to say, these are where these things meet. This is a need in the market for a higher end suppressor that is safer, that is more compatible with shooting for all demographics. And how can we meet that need and still, really enjoy what we do?
I love it. And I know that there's a little bit of noise in the background because you are a fully functioning facility right now. So I love that from the standpoint of like you're in it and like you have all the capabilities there in house. It's not like you're outsourcing to somewhere else, because I think there's been a big push to bring business and manufacturing back to the US, but I think that there's a really big challenge for a lot of local companies too, because of the cost differentials and stuff like that. And I also, we'll talk about 3D printing here too, because, to be able to 3D print metal blows my mind. Like that just blows my mind. So let's talk about U.S. businesses first, Matt, because I know you're pretty passionate about that as well. Talk to me about what U.S. manufacturing looks like and why people should be supporting it, because it's not an easy road, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so that was actually like a big part of why we started Ridgeline in 2018 was because in the industries that we were in, granted I come from like the defense industry, so like we don't naturally outsource that stuff, right? We try to maintain supply chains in the US for that. Um, but it's such a niche market, and the reality is that the US has lost a lot of our manufacturing, right, over the last 40 years and or longer. And we've also with that lost the skill set. And so it's not just a matter of like, hey, let's turn on some machines and have some people here and they start making parts one day. No, we've lost the equipment, we've lost the skill set in our people, and so that was a big challenge that I was seeing in the industry. And being that I'm very hands-on and I love to make things, that's kind of just why I said, you know what, I think it makes the most sense for me to kind of follow my passion a little bit here in manufacturing and learn how to do it and go and there's no better way to learn how to do something than doing it. And so we started the machine shop and we started making parts for the aerospace, the defense, the nuclear industries here in our local area. And that's what we've been doing since then. And the goal was always to be able to branch that same model into the consumer product industry. And that's exactly what we're doing with the suppressors is where we own the designs, we own the manufacturing, we're doing everything in-house. We don't have suppliers doing this. Everything from the powder manufacturing, we have the capability to actually atomize the powder and turn it into powder for the process, all the way to the Cerakote part, all the way even to like our packaging. So we're really looking at this very holistic approach to product development and manufacturing in the US and how we bring all of those things into one piece. Because a lot of when you look at every little piece of it, right, you might say even just as simple as your packaging, a lot of that component might be coming from out of the country, the cardboards, the printing, that kind of stuff. And so trying to maintain supply chain stability is a big issue for, well, consumer products, right? Like when you buy something, you want it and you want it to be shipped to you, right? Basically immediately. And then when you look at it from a strategic national perspective, and we saw this during COVID, you need to be able to maintain supply chain control just to have that resilience in the supply chain to be able to provide the basic necessities that we need for everyday life. And granted, like we're not trying to do every product, but we're trying to create the model and the system and show that it can be done. And we're actually working with a lot of companies in the current environment who we are trying to bring back that manufacturing on the consumer side for metal components like flashlights or just everyday things that people are using, trying to get that manufacturing out of Asia back into US hands. And this becomes it's a big deal because, well, it's bringing jobs and it's bringing that resilience, supply chain resilience back to the US, but it's also, we need to look at it as right now, what I've learned is that a consumer product has to be manufactured for about 25% of its sale price. And so that means you've got 75% of that product price tag that is going into other things that, and I understand that there's all these distributions and all these different things that have to happen, right, to get it into your hands. But like, how can we take small businesses like ours and consolidate that and bring that value directly to the consumer? And that's exactly what we're doing with the suppressors is we're taking out these distributors, we're taking out the middlemen, and we're strategically working with dealers around the country and then direct to consumer. So that way we don't have all of this kind of fluff in the product. And what that does is it puts more money back into the manufacturing, which is where it's required in the US. Like we have costs that every other country does not have, which is why we cannot compete with them. And it's not just labor. So obviously our labor is more expensive, but we also have a lot more insurance costs, tax costs, liability costs. Like there's just a lot more costs in the US because it costs more for us to do business because we do it right. Like we want our environment, we want our communities to be clean. We don't want to just, corrupt everything around us, which is what we see in other countries. And that's another aspect of it, because like, why do we want to ship? We all live on the same earth at the end of the day, whether it's the US or Asian markets, anywhere. If you're on the earth, eventually, like, you're going to have the same problems across the board. So what we're trying to do is like, we know how to do it very responsibly in the US. Let's start doing it, because that's really what's going to create that global impact for, just for better economic and better environmental impacts. So I don't know, there's a lot there, but I guess the short of it is like, we're really taking like a very holistic approach to this whole thing and trying to provide a model and that we can prove works. And so that way we can actually make this work across the board for other people as well.
Yeah, and that goes, you mentioned even just the holistic side of it. And I know that from a standpoint, Megan, you and I, we've gone back and forth on some of the regenerative farming and some of the other things that like you have a passion for, I have a passion for and do. And it's like, those are things that like, sharing pictures on that, it really is actually all the way through every fiber. So talk about that a little bit and how you're raising your kids in that manner. And then also kids around firearms in general, because I know that's very close and a dear subject to you.
Yeah, we have 6 kids, and all the way from teenagers down to a toddler. Will be 2 this summer. And we chose a few years back to take the same approach to our home and our lifestyle and our children and their education as we've taken in business. And we really believe strongly that if we are going to be responsible for our income and be responsible for the lives and incomes of our employees, how does that translate to our family? And so we made the decision to bring everybody home and homeschool around COVID. Like a lot of families, we were kind of thrown into it and then realized that was really a better way to do things, at least for us. And when you're looking from a standpoint of holistic manufacturing and you're comparing that to our life, well, how does that translate to, we live on a 70-acre farm. We have these 6 kids, and we've kind of based our entire life and modeled our entire life around making sure that we are entirely responsible for what we are contributing to our world, to our community, and to our family. And we've learned a lot along the way. It hasn't always been easy, and it hasn't always been seamless, and it hasn't always been well done. It's taken a ton of learning from a lot of different avenues. But when we can be responsible to some degree for the food that we're eating, we raise our own meat. I love to garden. That's kicking off right now. I've got about 300 starts in my greenhouse, and that's always fun. It's a great part of spring. We've got kind of a false spring going on right now, so it's like 80 degrees outside, and I really want to plant, and I've got to hold myself back because I know we're going to get at least one more freeze and it'll kill it all. So, but when we look at everything, when we look at, we want our kids to know that they are the primary, I guess that they are primarily responsible for their education, and we want them to learn that from a young age. We don't want them to believe that it's somebody else's job to educate them. We want them to take charge. Just like we don't believe that it should be someone else's job to control processes. We believe that we need to take charge of that. We need to take charge of processes. And it's kind of leached its way into everything about how we want to raise kids, how we want to run business, how we want to farm. We raise hay. Actually, that was our conversation last night. All right, what are we doing this weekend? Well, we got to talk about hay, and it's about that time to plant. What are we planting? And how are we going to manage watering this year? And so it's really if you're going to take a holistic approach in one part of your life, I think the only way to be truly holistic about it is then to let that translate into everything else, because that's the only way that we actually improve generation to generation, is by making it a system and helping to build that system so that it is sustainable way past what we're doing today.
I love it. So I know that Matt, you'd told me before that your family like has been in New Mexico for a really long time. You talk about that a little bit and what that heritage has meant to you?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, I was just thinking about that as Megan was wrapping up when she was talking about like how we're raising our children and what we're raising them to do, to learn, and what it ultimately comes down to is responsibility, right? And so we're teaching them that like you can't just shift responsibility somewhere else and pretend like it's not your responsibility anymore, right? And you see that a lot in our society with manufacturing. You see that a lot with education, and you see that a lot with our food supply. And so like those are like three big things that is required, in my opinion, to have a good life. You need to obviously have good food, good place to live. You need to have good education, and then you need to be able to make things. And so that's kind of like what our lifestyle is and who we are. And that comes from a long tradition in New Mexico. I'm a 14th generation New Mexican. Santa Fe was settled originally in about the 1680s. And then there was a Pueblo revolt, which forced all of the Europeans, Spaniards, they were Spanish descent at the time, forced them all out of Santa Fe. And then they came back in 1690 and resettled Santa Fe. So that was de Vargas that did that. Well, one of de Vargas's captains was Ignacio Roybal. And so since 1690, we have been in this area in New Mexico, and we've been scraping a living out of this high desert, kind of hard to live place at times because of just the environment that we live in. New Mexico could be pretty arid and dry some years, and some years it's like, I mean, it's lush and amazing in the mountains, right? And so like we come from that heritage of sustainability, and like, and it hasn't been that long ago that it was lost. So my grandmother grew up on a small ranch about 100 miles out of Santa Fe, and she would they would actually ride horses to Santa Fe like once a month and get their supplies that they needed. And it was like basics, right? It was like salt and maybe flour, and everything else they were living off the land. They were growing their own stuff, and they were ultimately responsible for themselves, right? And so I think that's really cool. And then basically from my dad's generation to us, you see that kind of lost somewhat, right? Like the modernization of society and the world that we know today, where you just run down the store and pick stuff up, or you don't even do that anymore. It gets delivered to your house, basically, whatever you want, very quickly. And I'm not saying those things are bad. Those things are great, and we absolutely use all that stuff. But it's like, how do we make sure that our heritage is really who we are, and to be able to push that forward to the next generation and teach our children who they are, and that responsibility of who they are, where they come from, and that they are responsible for their impact on the world, good or bad.
I think a lot of that translates over to what we want when we're teaching our kids gun safety. I know you asked about it a minute ago. And if we are going to be responsible for all these other things, we did not want to be responsible for putting something on the market that was not the safest and the best. And we are not going to put something out there that we are not 100% comfortable having our children use. And I know a lot of ranching families know this, but when you're on the ranch, dad's not always available to chase off coyotes. And I've been on walks with my kids just around our pieces, and we've had bold as brass coyotes come walking up, and and it's a little intimidating. Not very big creatures, but that can be a scary situation. And having them confident enough in a firearm, and me being confident enough behind a firearm that I know that we can defend our livestock and our family against those kinds of things, has really driven a lot of what went into wanting to develop a suppressor that met all these requirements. It needs to be absolutely hearing safe. It needs to be absolutely weight balanced, and it needs to be manageable for any firearm user of any size and shape.
So let's talk about innovation, because Matt, I mean, we've got 3D printing now that can print metal. Inconel, right, is one of the things. It's nickel alloy, I believe, right? But talk a little bit about the innovation of what 3D printing does, besides, like, one of the things I think you brought before was like machining or milling, you have to take away. But I think, you come up with a great explanation of how you could build something even more dynamic and better. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So you've got additive manufacturing, which additive, and you've got subtractive, which is your typical primary manufacturing method with CNC machines. And so let's talk real quick about subtractive, just to, subtractive machining has been around forever, for a very, very long time. Basically, we've been filing or cutting material away. So we start with a solid block and we'll cut the material away. And so like on a CNC machine, I might start with a solid aluminum block, and then I have to come in with end mills, which are just rotary tools that are spinning, that cut the material away and remove it. So subtractive, they subtract the material. That is fantastic manufacturing. Like it's what has created our modern world, honestly. And that's not going away. And we have those processes in house. We use them every day. But there's limitations for certain applications. So in order to cut something, you actually have to be able to access it. So you have to be able to get your tool inside of that pocket, and it's got a big motor head on it, and it's got all these things, right? So you're limited by the forces that's created by that, and by just the actual physical reach of being able to get into certain things. So what additive does is it gives us the ability to create complex geometries, complex internal features that you don't have to access with a machine, with a tool. So we can essentially, we're building this up layer by layer. So we're adding material, add additive. And so we do that layer by layer, typically in anything from a 20 to 60 or 80 micron layer thickness. And so we're doing this like in very high resolution. So your hair, typical hair might be about 6 thousandths of an inch, 0.006. We're doing this in about a third of a hair, so 0.002 thousandths. And so it's very high resolution and very intricate, and it gives us the ability to create internal features that you really virtually could not create with any other manufacturing method, whether it be casting, CNC machining. And so it gives us that ability to take a product like a suppressor and design passages internally that allow us to do very interesting things with the flow. And so additive technology lends itself very well to any product that requires flow. And that flow could be airflow, could be liquid flow. It could be like gas, liquid, or even electromagnetic stuff. And so this is why like we see it prevailing in like the aerospace industry, rocket nozzles, jet turbine blades, and then a firearm. The end of the muzzle of a firearm has all these same characteristics of a jet engine, of a rocket nozzle, in terms of it has supersonic flow coming out of it, hot gases that moving very fast, and it's got a lot of temperature and a lot of forces on it. And so that's why like additive lends itself very well to the suppressor technologies, and we're able to actually do very cool things inside that allow us to get better sound suppression in a smaller form factor, and control thermal buildup. So kind of all of the top things that the suppressor industry, especially professional users like law enforcement and military, are looking for, we're able to kind of optimize the suppressor for those. And that's exactly what we've done with the Ridgeline suppressor product.
That's amazing. Well, and I know that, there's some huge advantages to having a suppressor especially when you're talking about like your ear, and the safety around the hearing. And I think that, there's been a lot of like, I love going out and hard shooting. I've shot all sorts of different things. Like, it's just, to me, it's fun. But like, there's been times where like, even you're around a suppressor and it's like this like high pitched noise. It's just not, you just don't want to be around it for very long. And I did get the chance to be on a range with one of your suppressors, and it was so notably different that it was enjoyable to actually like listen or be there. Like, it was not chasing me off. So talk to me about that, because you had told me about something called the AHA algorithm that the Army uses, and that is so different than what just like staying under a certain decibel rating of what like a suppressor would be, right? So like, can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So this goes back to like the conversation we've been having about like holistic approaches. Like, you have to look at all the pieces in order to get a good solution with anything. And so like with the suppressors, when you look at the acoustic signature that is being generated, there's a high shock wave, there's a peak that happens, and that's the peak sound pressure. And so peak sound pressure level is what typically the industry will refer to when they're saying dB. And so what that is what is the true value of that dB? And then they also talk about it in a differential. So like, how much does it actually reduce the decibel level from an unsuppressed shot, for example? So on this firearm, you have unsuppressed, it's going to be maybe like 170 dB. And then when we suppress it, it might be 140 dB. And so you're getting that 30 dB of attenuation, knocking that peak down that much. And while that is one metric that you need to look at, you also need to look at the rest of the acoustic signal and that whole frequency. And so I call it full spectrum attenuation. So we need to look at that full frequency spectrum, not just this one peak. And what that does is it gives us the ability to actually attenuate and tune the suppressor to knock down frequencies that are getting into your inner ear that causes the hearing damage, that causes like that high ping sound that you were referring to earlier, and bring that tone way down. And so even though the peak dB might be still similar, what's more important is that the rest of that frequency content is actually attenuated to bring that power spectral density way down in that bandwidth that we care about. So like, the human ear has three main parts. You've got your outer ear, which is the part you see out here, these reflectors that grab things. And then you've got your middle ear, which is your ear canal and your eardrum. And then you've got your inner ear, which has the components of the ear that turn that analog acoustic pressure signal into a digital signal and transfers it to your brain. So there's actually small little nerve endings, and there's all kinds of things, and that's where damage happens. That's where you get tinnitus from. And so by attenuating frequencies that cause damage to the inner ear, we're actually able to make it safer and sound quieter. And so like, the typical human ear, for example, is 0.8 to 1.2 kilohertz is the natural frequency of your inner ear. And so by taking all of our data and all of our testing that we've done and adjusting things in our suppressors to make sure that we are attenuating frequencies in that bandwidth and others, we're actually able to build a much quieter suppressor.
Love it. So what I think, there's something else to be said about, the traditional things that are out there. There's your titanium, used for its strength and maybe the weight. You talk to the differences of like maybe what that titanium versus, a 3D printed Inconel would look like.
Yeah, for sure.
Sound
Inconel is a nickel superalloy. And so it's a alloy that was developed for high temperature, high stress applications. So what it means is that it can maintain its tensile strength at very high temperatures. And so you can heat it up, and it's not like you take a piece of like iron, right? And you can heat it up red hot, and then you can just grab it and you can bend it, no problem. So Inconel actually is going to maintain its strength to where even when it is at those temperatures, it's still maintaining its tensile strength. You're not going to be able to deform it and bend it. And so like it was developed for applications like jet turbine blades, rocket nozzles. And so these high stress, high temperature applications in a corrosive environment, in a combustion environment. And so that's exactly what we see at the end of a firearm. We see a high temperature, high stress, corrosive environment. And so that's why Inconel is very well suited for suppressors. One of the challenges with Inconel is it's very difficult to machine. And so, but it's actually much easier to print. So it's one of the hardest alloys to machine. It's one of the easiest alloys to print. And so by easy, I mean that it performs very well. It's very repeatable. So we have good process control over it. So we can make sure that we maintain a good solid product at the end of every print. But the downside of Inconel is it is a slightly heavier alloy. It's got about the same density as steel. And so when you look at titanium, on the other hand, titanium does give you that very high strength to weight ratio. And so it's very strong for how light it is. The challenge with titanium is it doesn't do well in highly corrosive, high temperature, high stress environments. And so when you couple that with that it's a very difficult alloy to print, I'm not saying we can't print it, we do print it, but to get the reliability of the builds that we need in the product price point that a suppressor is, it does not lend itself well to that application. In an aerospace application where we were going to hip it, or we were going to do some very expensive post-process heat treatment or anything like that, those processes exist and we know how to do them. It's just, it doesn't lend itself well to the market, right? And so like we can't sell you something that is not competitive, and that's just a fact. And so that's where titanium, especially 3D printed titanium, is just not a very well-suited alloy for suppressors. Whereas Inconel, on the other hand, is like, from an engineering perspective, is one of your ideal alloys that you would want to use. And so going back to like what we can do with additive, we can actually take Inconel, we can make it much lighter than it would be in any other application, because we can do intricate thin walls and we can do more organic type structures that allow us to load things so that way you don't have like bid beams and stuff in there, right? And so we're able to make it structurally sound but still very light, and that's one of the advantages of additive as well.
One of the things I hadn't known was that, you know, a lot of the rules and laws, like, because you think about, suppressor, silencer, like James Bond, Assassin, like, I mean, all these movies and things like that, that a lot of these rules against suppressors by the federal government and the tax stamps and different things like that started with like Al Capone and the mob. And I even the switchblade, like, I mean, a lot of these things are very old. And I think this year, the tax stamp, which was like $200 per application, was eliminated for the first time in a really long time. And I think I would love for you to talk about that a little bit, and why more families, hunters, people that are just target shooting are buying suppressors. Because first of all, I guess the stigma is gone that you're buying a suppressor to be an assassin, because that's not what people do, but you're protecting your ears. And like, what is the process, to go through that? Because I mean, you're still obviously checked out. Like how do you get checked by, what is the FBI or whoever's doing background? Like, I don't know, is it alcohol, tobacco, firearms? Yes. How does that all happen?
Yes. Yeah. So you're absolutely right, Will. Like, everybody should have a suppressor as a firearm, in my opinion, because especially hunters and ranchers, because like you don't always have time to throw on ear protection if you're gonna shoot, right? If you're at a range and shooting, sure, like you know what you're doing, everything's planned, you got Air Pro on. But like if you're not, you're out on the ranch and you're cruising, and you need to shoot at a coyote or something, you may not throw ear pro on, right? Because you don't have the time. And so that's where a suppressor, like, I mean, it's huge. It saves your hearing in a big way. And so, like, yeah, I believe that the stigma of like having a suppressor, you're an assassin or you're trying to do something nefarious is gone. And people are starting to realize, like, no, this is a tool that everybody should have. And so you kind of referred to the NFA. So the National Firearms Act was passed in the 1930s, and it was to do exactly what you were talking about. The mobs, they were running around with Tommy guns and all this stuff. And so the main things that affect general public that it restricts are suppressors, machine guns, and short-barreled rifles or short-barreled shotguns. And a short barrel is considered anything under 16 inches that still has a butt pad on it or a rifle stock on it. So that'd be a short-barreled rifle. And so what they were trying to do is basically get a hold of the mob. And as we all already know, and it's true then and still true now, like, people are going to break the law. Adding another law is not going to actually get them to start following the law. But the NFA, what it did is it restricted those items and it put a tax stamp on it, and they call it the Special Occupation Tax, or SOT. And so that $200 up until January 1st of this year was required to buy a suppressor or a short-barreled rifle. Anymore, in every state in the U.S., it's illegal to buy machine gun unless you have licenses as an FFL or an SOT. But as an individual, you really can't buy a machine gun. And so you can buy suppressors, you can buy short-barreled rifles. Well, there was a $200 tax stamp associated with it. They removed that in January. Now it's $0. However, there still is the background check process that is required by the NFA. And what that entails is they use your fingerprints, they use a picture of yourself. We submit a form through, it's an all electronic. We use eForms is what the process is, the program that the ATF uses. And so, like, as a dealer, I would get, like, your fingerprints, you'd go get them, they'd be digital, and you'd send me a picture of yourself, like basically what I'm looking right now, your shoulders up. We would submit that along with, like, your address, basically your personal information. You'd answer a questionnaire stating that you don't want to do anything nefarious with this. They're canned questions in this form. And then we'd submit that to the ATF. The ATF then does the background check through the, I believe it is an FBI background check. That's who's actually doing it. But anyways, that comes back from them and gives me an approval or a denial that you're allowed to obtain that suppressor. At that point, I can then transfer the suppressor to you and physically transfer it to you and give it to you. So it sounds like a very complicated process, but there's a lot that's happening, and there's a lot that's been improved in the last, like, 2 years. It used to be like, takes 2 years and $200 to get a suppressor plus whatever you paid for it. Now it's $0 and typically takes less than a week. So it's very fast and it's all digital. And so we're able to get your fingerprints, get your picture, submit your forms. And so, like, basically the process from start to finish is, let's say you're buying a Ridgeline suppressor, you go on our website, you buy a suppressor, you check out. At checkout, it'll ask you who your FFL is going to be. Your FFL that we would then on the back end, you pay for it, you check out, that's all you do. We on the back end then do all this ATF process paperwork to transfer it to your dealer. Your dealer, you would then go to your dealer, give them your fingerprints, or a lot of dealers have kiosks in their facility that you're able to get your fingerprints. And so you do all that, submit your form, they would do all the paperwork for you, and then basically call you when it's ready. So the big things you're doing is fingerprints, pictures, and of course purchasing whatever suppressor you wanted to do.
Got it. Yeah, and really, like, how do you locate, like, what a FFL? Like, is it just somebody near you, or is that, do you help people with that?
Yeah, so, like, there's on our website, there's a tool that you can put in your zip code and the radius that you want it to look, and it'll pull up all the FFLs that are within that 5 or 10, whatever mile radius you select. and it'll give you, yeah. So then you just select that FFL, and go from there. I mean, a lot of times, if people already know a gun store, right? If you're buying a suppressor, you probably have a gun and you bought it from somewhere local, and so they know like what gun stores they want. But if you didn't, we for sure have that tool and have that a way to select who you want to send it to.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you've thought through not only the design of the suppressors themselves, because you have 3 different varieties, right? And then you also have a chassis that you've designed because in engineering you wanted to make it better. And then, but you're also making the box, and I think I see one behind you, like it's a wood box, right? So that's a new thing?
Yeah, for sure. So, again, like we're doing this, and we're definitely learning as we go, right? And so, like we talked about, we're trying to figure out how do we maintain control of our supply chain and how we keep a holistic approach and how we bring those manufacturing dollars that are now being spent all over these different processes of getting a product made from nothing into a product that's like something you can buy, like this suppressor that's inside of this box. It's like, how do we do that, and how do we do that in America? Well, it comes down to stuff like this. So we have typically a suppressor is going to be shipped in a cardboard box that's got all of the company's logos and printing, and it looks super pretty and super cool sitting on a shelf. Well, what's the first thing that you do when you get a box like that? I throw it away. So I pull what I want out of it and I throw it away. And so the fact is that cardboard box has a lot of money in it, has a lot of processes in it. Some of that's maybe coming from out of country, the paper cardboard that's used to build it. And so there's waste there. There's a lot of waste, right? And so what we're doing is we're taking like this more, I think it's more environmentally friendly, honestly, where we're taking like products like this wood product, we're actually machining this box in-house. And we can make these boxes very fast, very cheap out of wood. We can make this wood box for about the same price as a cardboard box was going to cost us. Now, not every company can do that because they don't have access to the machining and the equipment like we do, right? We can just automate this and set it up and run a whole bunch of these. And so that's the advantages that we have, right? And that's where we're trying to say, like, so instead of us spending $30 on this cardboard box that you're going to throw away as soon as you get, we're going to make this out of wood. It's going to cost us less. It's going to be more environmentally friendly, honestly. And now you have a cool wood box. And you could decide, like, if you still want to throw this or use it for firewood, by all means do it. But at least you have a cool box that you can do other stuff with. And then what actually drove me to that idea is about 3 years ago, we had the largest fire in northern New Mexico. It was over 300,000 acres. I think it was about 360,000 acres of forest that burned. And that burned through like my hometown, my home area. Our ranch is burned. And from that, there is an enormous amount of wood coming out of there. All the trees, and there's just all of the trees got burned. But when a forest fire burns, it doesn't like burn everything to ash usually. Like the trees, it burns all the needles off of them. It burns the bark, but the wood inside the tree is still good and is still there. And so like what we're doing with these is we're taking and reclaiming all of that all that wood that would have just been thrown away, wasted, right? Or, I mean, it not wasted or gone back into the environment at some point, rotted out. But we're using that as a product here that is an added value product that is green, and we have total supply chain control of it.
Megan, there's been a huge push and really movement for women in firearms, self-defense training, families also like hunting together and shooting together. Can you talk a little bit about that movement? Maybe why? I mean, we know the world is getting more dangerous. It just seems like every second there's something happening. And I think everybody needs to take responsibility about their own self-defense and what they know, and precautions as well. But Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was introduced to firearms as a child. They were always part of our home. We didn't hunt growing up. We lived in pretty big cities up until we moved to New Mexico and kind of moved away from that. And then when I married Matt, I was very much introduced into the hunting world, and I enjoy it. My kids enjoy it. Kind of, I joke, one of our favorite things to do Sunday afternoons is to jump in the side by side and go, plink at prairie dogs, because they're a problem. They're a problem for our livestock. They're a problem for our hay. And I don't think we could do that. We couldn't enjoy that if not everyone in our home was comfortable around a firearm. And that's been very important to me. On the other side of that, I think as a movement, and we're seeing here women wanting to be able to defend themselves. And, I've had the hand-to-hand self-defense things, how to protect yourself in a parking lot. And that's something that we talk to teenage girls about all the time. We talk to young mothers about all the time. But I think more and more we're being confronted with, this may not be a hand-to-hand issue. This is probably going to be, there's going to be a weapon involved if you're in a safety situation. And how do you prepare women for that? How do you prepare women with children with them for that? And how do you make sure that they are comfortable and aware in a situation? This kind of I'm going to jump back. This kind of ties back into why suppressors, we believe, are so necessary in law enforcement settings. If you are in an active shooter situation and you've got law enforcement coming into a home, there's cars involved, an office building, whatever it is, the concussion of that rifle that they're shooting is going to just come right back on you. And it's not just creating the panic of the actual situation. You've got an added panic of hearing loss if there are shots fired. There's just this whole system of things that are coming at you in a situation like that. And I think there's been a lot more awareness about, or I guess, okay, women are becoming more aware that if they are in that situation, there's probably not someone in their immediate environment that is going to stand up and protect them. Unless you are, unless I'm with my husband, it's probably just me. If I'm at the store, it's probably just me and my kids. And I need to be able to rely on myself. I need to be comfortable and have enough presence of mind not to panic, not to put myself or my children in an even more dangerous situation. And I think a lot of those factors have then led themselves to this re-upping of women wanting to be comfortable and educated behind a gun. And we're seeing, women-specific concealed carry classes, and we're seeing women-specific marketing campaigns. There's, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but there's this whole business introducing women to firearms and getting them, a firearm that they're comfortable with. They don't even make firearms. They are just helping women understand them. And from a woman in that perspective, it's not because I want something in hot pink, and it's not because I want something that, in pink camo that looks cooler, has rhinestones on it. I know that's a huge marketing thing, but it's really because I am built differently. My hand is like half the size of his. I don't have the same upper body strength that a man is going to have. And how do I then pick up a weapon and have the same capability behind it that he has? And the training that goes into that, we've had a lot of conversations with women in law enforcement on just how different it is for them to go through their trainings and their certifications. Not because that they are less capable or because they are, not as strong or any of those things, but it's simply just biology. We are just built different. We just don't have the same. I mean, if you're looking like percentage of strength from your bicep into your tendons into your shoulder, we all have the same muscle structure. But what we don't have is the same percentage of strength that translates from our joints to our muscles in through our tendons and ligaments. And being able to access that, it's just biology. I mean, it's just how we're made. We're not made to do things the same way. And I've really appreciated that there are women that are recognizing this, and men too. We've got great friends that have wonderful women-centered courses in a lot of the FFLs in town. But making sure that everyone is safe behind a gun, for one, is safe around a gun, and is comfortable with it is really important. And it matters to us. We've got, so of those 6 kids, 4 of them are girls. Our first 4 are girls. Then we've got 2 boys at the end. And our 3 oldest have now entered the hunting world. They've had their own tags. I think they filled like 6 tags this year. Just 4 tags. Yeah. Oh, just 4 tags. It felt like a lot of hunts. Just 4 tags. But they are comfortable hunting because they can go out and sit behind that gun, shot after shot after shot, and it's not hurting. It's not recoiling into their shoulder. And these are little girls shooting pretty big rifles. And we are confident then sending them, of course, with an adult, out on a hunt and knowing that they are not going to jump with that gun. They're not going to yank the trigger because they're not afraid of the sound or the recoil, because they have, one, had the privilege of being able to shoot suppressed pretty much their entire shooting experience, but also because they have taken the time to know and understand that weapon on a level of, this is not scary. This is not intimidating. This is a tool. And that has become a narrative that is not common in our nation or even in our world anymore. There's a lot of media pushing for guns to be scary and intimidating, and this very violent language behind them, when in reality we need to see them as a tool, and we need to have the education and the training behind it that allows for people to see what is going on behind that gun, what is happening with the person behind that gun. And we need to reframe that. And that's been part of our entire philosophy in raising our kids to be comfortable around guns, is that it's not about this violent weapon. It is about the mentality, it is about the education, and it is about what is going on with the person handling a tool.
And it comes down, like, just to add to what she's talking about, Will, is, again, it comes down to responsibility, right? And so, like, regardless of the situation you're in, whether it be a self-defense or a hunting situation, efficacy with a firearm is absolutely vital, right? And in a hunting situation, or in certain self-defense situations, it could mean life and death, right? And so that's where teaching children, teaching women, just general education around firearm safety and around how to use firearms is, it's very critical. It's very important. And it's our responsibility. It naturally comes to us who live in rural areas. Like, we don't have law enforcement that can respond instantly. So we do have to be able to defend ourselves at some level. And then you're seeing that as well in cities at this point, right? Because, I mean, a lot of our law enforcement, we don't have enough of it. We don't have, and so they're not able to respond quickly enough anymore either. And that's not by any fault of their own. It's just the situation we live in right now. And so, like, teaching suppressors are a very important part of teaching rifle and firearm efficacy, and being confident that they're not afraid of the rifle, that they're not afraid of the recoil, they're not afraid of the sound, they're not afraid of the pressure wave that's going to come off the muzzle. And being confident when we put, like she was just saying, we had 3 of our daughters that hunted this year. We were confident that when we put them on an animal, that they were going to be, that they were going to be very efficient, and that they were going to do what they needed to do, right, to be able to take that animal ethically. And that's very important in hunting. It's very important to teach our children that, right? Like, we want them to be able to take good shots, and we want them to have confidence. And suppressors adds huge amounts of confidence to their shootability, has youth, and even as women, and any new shooter, even a man. This is going to make a big difference for them in those aspects.
So talk to me. I know that you have, because Megan, you brought up something, and it was around law enforcement. And I remember one of the points brought up was that, law enforcement, a lot of times, yes, they'll go into a closed environment, It's going to be very loud. Everybody's going to be disturbed, not being able to follow directions. But on top of that, they're going to maybe sling that back over their shoulder, and then that suppressor is going to be incredibly hot and probably burn them, melt them, maybe hurt somebody that they're trying to help or whatever. But with 3D printing, Matt, you've been able to figure out how to do the inside super durable and the outside a different material that you can actually touch even after a bunch of rounds have gone through there. So, I mean, I think that's pretty awesome. And talk about that just a little bit. And then that you have like 3 different versions, right? You have one for more that's going to be for your law enforcement or your, AR type shooter or things like that. You have one for your hunter in general, and then one for your like really long range, like marksman. So can you talk about that and maybe the products you have?
Yeah, for sure. So there's some key design aspects that we look at with the suppressor depending on the user and the end user. How they rank those design factors is going to be kind of like the industry that they're in. So like law enforcement, as you were alluding to, they care about thermal mitigation, they care about flash, they care about form factor on a tactical firearm. So if they're doing like CQB type stuff inside of a home, inside of a car, close quarters, they're going to care about the size of that suppressor. Then they're going to care about the sound, right? And so you've got thermal, you've got form factor, you've got flash, and then you've got sound. And so that's what led us to designing 3 different products, all suppressors. But we have what we call our ARM suppressor. We'll talk about that one first. That one is designed for an AR-15 platform. And that's what most of our military and law enforcement use. They use that style. They use a gas gun in 5.56. And it's designed to be low back pressure, which means that traditionally, if you put a suppressor on a gas gun, the gas that's coming back and getting through the bolt creates a lot of gas in your face. So you actually end up, like, if you're doing long strings of fire, you can actually, like, it burns your eyes and makes it hard to breathe kind of thing, right? So you're getting a lot of gas coming back. You don't want that, so you want to keep that gas moving forward and not create a lot of back pressure. So that's a primary design factor in the ARM. It's low back pressure, a flow-through suppressor. The other thing is thermal mitigation, right? Because typically when law enforcement or military enters a close quarter situation, they're going to be going into a house, right? And they're going to be going in with their rifles. So they're going to be going in with their M4s. And when they first initiate contact, they're probably running the rifle because it's more reliable. They're able to shoot more accurately farther. But let's say they get into the house and for whatever reason, they have plenty of tactical reasons why they might set the rifle down. It's on a sling and they sling it over and they'll draw their pistol. Well, when they sling it over, if that suppressor is sitting there at 400 or 500 degrees, it's going to burn their leg. It's going to burn anything it touches, right? And so you have that situation for law enforcement and military work. You want to mitigate that thermal buildup. And we've been able to do that with the technology we've designed in the internals of the suppressor. So low back pressure, low flash, or mitigate flash as much as possible. Ours virtually has none. Thermal mitigation, and then of course acoustic signature reduction, removing that high pressure wave that's going to come from shooting a rifle in an enclosed area like a house or a car, right? So that's what the factors are that military and law enforcement are looking for. And that translates to the civilian market as well, because anybody who's shooting ARs, which is a very popular firearm, is going to benefit from all of those same things as well. And so that's our ARM suppressor. It's all Inconel, very durable, designed for the high rate of fire, long usage, just a very durable suppressor. And then we have our Hush suppressor, which was designed for long-range precision shooting. And that's going to not be typically on a semi-automatic rifle. That's going to be on a bolt-action rifle. So this is what hunters are going to be using. This is what snipers, long-range or high-ground guys are using, is a bolt rifle. The reason for that is they're typically more accurate. And when you're shooting long ranges and trying to be accurate, you're not trying to just shoot a lot. It's a very much more methodical type of shooting. And so with that comes larger calibers, more gunpowder, more pressure. And what that causes is a lot of heat buildup again. So heat's always an issue. You'll see that heat's a common theme across all our platforms. Well, it's for a different reason though. You're not necessarily going to be slinging your rifle over, although you may in certain situations. But when you have a high power optic, it actually generates mirage. So the heat coming off of the suppressor makes a mirage cloud right at the end of your barrel that makes it difficult to see through, and virtually you cannot shoot anymore when you're trying to see things long range. So the traditional solution to that is to put a cover on the suppressor. So they make a fabric cover, you put it on, and it mitigates that mirage. Well, that does it. That's not the bet. I didn't like that solution because it cooks the suppressor internally, and then it's just more things you have to worry about. So the Hush is actually an Inconel 3D printed core. So all of our internal structure, the stuff that's getting direct exposure to gas and heat, is all Inconel. The outer shell is a composite material that is an insulator, essentially. It doesn't transfer heat very well, so then it doesn't radiate this heat on the shell, and it eliminates that mirage. So under normal firing circumstances, you don't need anything extra on the Hush. It has its own thermal mitigation and mirage mitigation, and it's designed to grab that heat and conduct it back through the core rather than out through the shell. And then it is an over barrel suppressor, so it goes over your barrel, only adds 5 inches to the end of the barrel, but gives you the advantages of like a 10-inch suppressor. And so again, that form factor, trying to keep these rifles as short as possible and keep the good dynamics that you need on a rifle. And then our third suppressor is going to be what we call our SRR. And that one was designed, it's a bigger, so it's all Inconel, very durable. It's also an over barrel system, but it's got printed shells in it that allow us to draft cool air to keep the outside cooler. Very, very low flash. That's going to be like your ELR type application, right? Where it's just that next level of long range, large caliber firearms. And so ELR is extreme long range competition for their like shooting 1,000 yards plus. But there's also real world applications for that in military as well. And a big part of what the military is looking at is signature across the board. And so that means sound, thermal, flash. And so obviously we're doing a lot with sound, we're doing a lot with flash, we need to do a lot with thermal. And so we're doing those things, and all of those are very important to the military. And that's what those cans are all designed to mitigate very well.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that today. I know I always learn something when you're talking. It's fantastic. So I hope those that are at home like learned a little bit more about taking like responsibility about their own self-defense, as well as like what it looks like from a standpoint of like holistic across all aspects of life. And then also taking a risk and building your own manufacturing in the United States, not outsourcing anything, but really turning that into a success and ultimately innovating over and over and over again. Because I know you have more innovations coming that like have never been done before, right? So it's like we talk about a suppressor for a shotgun, which has never been done. And so I mean, I love that you have tenacity that wants to continue to solve problems, and that's what makes this world amazing. So any other final comments at all?
Not really. Just, I mean, I think it was great having us on. We really appreciate it, and we really enjoy getting to talk to people about what we're doing. And so, as always, if you have any questions, reach out to us on the website, reach out to us through social, at Ridgeline Suppressors and RidgelineSuppressors.com. We're more than happy to, I'll talk to anybody, and I do all the time. I like talking to customers and answering their questions, because that's where I am one of those guys. I am a user. I do have questions about stuff, and I like to be able to help, and so being on the other end of that, we are more than happy to support and answer questions and just help the industry, help our customers, help help the people. This whole thing, everything we talked about, ultimately comes back to people and who we are and what we're trying to do in this world, and it's all about people. And so that's what we're doing here. And again, thanks, Will, for having us on, and I would look forward to talking with you some more at some point.
Perfect. Well, until next time, thanks for joining us on Regenerative Inspiration, where we're trying to encourage, inspire, talk about innovation, and ultimately make sure that you have new stories of people that have overcome things that, knowing that you can. So if you're going to go out there and start a manufacturing plant in the United States, give Matt a call. Or if you have any other questions about anything like that, please do so. Please, and again, remember the algorithm doesn't necessarily like us. So you gotta, promote this, push it out to somebody who might want to hear about this and would benefit. So thanks so much. Until next time, have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Hold on one sec.